War has its own mathematics, an equation where speed almost never wins over armor, and where courage rarely triumphs over steel. But in 1943, in a factory seething like the heart of a metal titan, the United States decided to defy the fundamental rules of the battlefield. They created something that shouldn't exist, something too light to survive, too fast to be ignored, and too deadly to be underestimated. The M18 Hellcat, the fastest tank destroyer of World War II. This documentary is a return to the origins, to the metallic sounds that echoed through the warehouses. With hands stained with oil, the steel is fed, bent, shaped, hammered, tested, until it becomes a mechanical arrow capable of piercing hell. Welcome. Inside the factory where the M18 Hellcat was forged into the fastest killer of World War II. As the war began to devour continents, the U.S. Army realized a problem. Its tanks were slow, heavy, and incapable of reacting to the speed and precision of the German panzers. The American advantage lay in another philosophy. Don't build a wall. Create a predator. That's when the engineers received the impossible order. Create a tank destroyer that can exceed 80 kilometers per hour. They laughed. Then they swallowed hard. And finally, they began to work. Inside the Buick division in Flint, Michigan, a production line originally designed for automobiles was transformed into an industrial war laboratory. There was no glamour. Only noise, smoke, and urgency. The machines were repositioned. The tools have been reconfigured. And, above all, an ironclad pact was forged between engineers and workers. Speed will be our shield. They knew they were about to produce something that had no parallel on the European front. When the foundry doors opened at dawn, the heat rose like a dragon's breath. Incandescent bars were pushed into molds that would soon become part of a hull as thin as paper, at least by the standards of traditional tanks. The Hellcat wasn't built for durability. It was built to survive. Instead of being thick and monolithic, the armor plates underwent a special heat treatment, making them lighter without completely losing their structural strength. Each piece emerged from the furnace marked by a metallic blue sheen, a sign that the steel had withstood the thermal shock. On the other side of the warehouse, workers were handling mountains of smaller parts: supports, screws, rails, control rods, levers, axles. There were hundreds of components that needed to fit together with absolute precision. After all, if even one of them failed, the vehicle would no longer be a Hellcat, but a trap for its occupants. The roar of the hydraulic presses echoed like relentless thunder. The ground vibrated. The air was a mixture of oil, burnt metal, and human sweat. And in the heart of that storm, the Hellcat began to be born. No machine is faster than your heart. And the Hellcat received his as one who invokes a god. The Continental R-975C4 radial engine, originally used in aircraft, was adapted for the tank destroyer. When first tested inside the vehicle's lightweight structure, the engineers were silent. The tremor was brutal. The vibration, almost animalistic. It seemed like the Hellcat wanted to escape the assembly line and rush off to war before it was even finished. The engine roared at 400 horsepower. It didn't seem like much. But inside that lightweight hull, it was like installing a hurricane inside a metal box. The engineers knew. If the Hellcat gained speed, it would have a chance at survival. If it lost, it would be destroyed. Therefore, each engine was tested 3 times before being assembled. Each fault was diagnosed on the same day. Each questionable part was replaced. War did not tolerate mistakes. The Hellcat was born quickly, but it needed to be lethal. And its lethality came in the form of a 76mm M1A1 cannon, equipped with ammunition capable of piercing German armor at long distances. The assembly of the cannon was a meticulous ritual. The pipe was carried on enormous cranes, as if it were a sacred spear. Technicians checked the internal alignment with optical instruments that looked more like surgeons' tools. The turret was secured with reinforced bolts because the recoil was so violent that it could displace structural components. A single flaw in that system could open the tower like a metal flower. And no engineer wanted to bear that burden. A phrase circulated among the workers. The cannon isn't just the Hellcat's weapon, it's the choice between life and death. The real story of the Hellcat isn't about machines. It's about the men who built them. Workers who have never set foot on a battlefield. But they knew that with every screw tightened, they were protecting brothers, parents, children, and neighbors fighting on the other side of the ocean. Henry Malone, a hull builder, used to repeat, "If I miss a hole, someone will die." The phrase spread like a mantra. In the cafeteria, amidst metalworker sandwiches and burnt coffee, a sense of unity was being created. They weren't building tanks. They were building opportunities for a comeback. Returning home. Return to life. And that shaped the Hellcat more profoundly than any metal tool. Before being sent to the front lines, every Hellcat had to survive the final ritual. The test field. There, the vehicle was driven through dirt tracks, mud, rocks, and impossible inclines. The engine was being stressed to its limit. The suspension swayed like a wounded animal. The tower spun under brutal impacts. Many vehicles emerged nearly destroyed. Others simply stopped. And when that happened, engineers would go to them like doctors investigating a critically ill patient. They wrote everything down. They were taking parts apart. They created solutions. Every failure was turned into strength. Every problem, an advantage. The Hellcat wasn't perfect. But he was honest. And brutally fast. When the first Hellcats arrived in Europe, Allied officers were shocked. It didn't look like a tank. It looked like a beast, light, short, agile, restless. During battles, the Hellcats slashed through flanks like blades of wind. Panzer tanks were patrolling. They shot before they were seen. They disappeared before the counterattack. The American tactic has changed. Now, the enemy was no longer confronted head-on. The competition was based on speed, of surprise, from the movement. And the Hellcat became the deadliest and fastest tank destroyer of the entire war. The legend reached its peak at the Battle of Aracourt in 1944. The conditions were terrible. Thick fog. Irregular terrain. Visibility is almost zero. The panzers advanced like shadows of steel. They seemed invincible. But then, Hellcats emerged from the sidelines like mechanized lightning bolts. They accelerated straight towards the German flank. They fired. They retreated. They changed positions. They attacked again. In the eyes of the German commanders, that made no sense. How could a vehicle so light be so fast? How could he attack and disappear before anyone could react? In just a few hours, the Hellcats destroyed more than 24 armored vehicles, reversing a battle that seemed lost. It was there that an Allied commander said, "They are not tanks. They are predators." When the news reached the Buick division, workers gathered in silence, listening to the industrial radios. Hellcats Emboscaram Panzers. Decisive speed. Impressive resilience. They weren't celebrating. Don't smile. They just kept working. Because they knew that somewhere in Europe there were young men inside Hellcats waiting for that factory. That production line. Those workers. So they wouldn't fail. Never. Final. The symbol of the war that speed won. Today, the surviving Hellcats are in museums, silent as sleeping beasts. But if you get close enough, you can hear, almost like a whisper, the roar of the radial engine. The slight vibration of the tower. The distant echo of the tools. It's the factory's memory. The memory of men. The memory of war. The M18 Hellcat did not win by brute force. He won because of his speed. For the audacity. Through the human decision to defy the impossible. And so, it remains forever as the machine that proved that sometimes, speed is more deadly than steel.